Hey James. Alright, in this video I'm going to be doing my debate discussion, giving a debate argument for two sides of this question I'm going to read you in a minute. But the topic is Fitzgerald's short stories, The Rich Boy and Babylon Revisited. And so here is the question that I'm going to be arguing. Assuming that Fitzgerald was writing to his peers in both The Rich Boy and Babylon Revisited, which story presents the most compelling message? How does Fitzgerald emphasize that message through literary devices? So, these two stories, they were both very symbolic. They were both written to convey a message. They weren't, in and of themselves, they're not the most fulfilling stories, but they have some similarities and some pretty key differences that I'd like to address in here. Now, The Rich Boy, I'm going to argue for that one first. The Rich Boy was an awesome message in the sense that it showed an example of what one would want to avoid. One who's seeking for success in their life, who's seeking to accomplish whatever aspirations they may have, accomplish any goals that life goals that they may have. The Rich Boy gives an example of how not to do that. Now there are three main themes that I really picked up on in The Rich Boy, and the first one is of responsibility and irresponsibility. Now Anson, the main character, we begin the story with him. He's inherited a large amount of money. He's very rich, and with that came a sense of irresponsibility. And he would often do things without thinking through them. He was drunk constantly. And that really affected his friendships and really affected his relationship with Paula. Could have been who actually would have been his wife had he not been struggling with that issue. Now the second theme in here is accountability. And Anson's problem, his main problem, was that he wasn't too accountable for himself. He wasn't willing to accept the consequences of his actions, which is my third theme. Now him and Paula had become very close. They got to a point where they were really ready to be married, and Paula wanted to introduce Anson to her family, and then Anson went off and got drunk. And he came in, met Paula's mother, and was a mess. He was out of it. He was completely drunk, and that really just came as a consequence of his action. He missed out on a pretty major part of his life, or what could have been a pretty major part of his life, that marriage to Paula. And then, as we see later in the story, he is very dismayed. Would be the best word. He's very dismayed to see Paula, as she's so happy, and he with her other husband there, and he just thinks to himself that he could have had that life. He could have had that life where he was more responsible, and where he more accountable. So then we have Babylon Revisited as the other story. Now this story it started out similar. The man Charlie, he was a drunk, and he neglected his family and didn't provide for them sufficiently. He would go off and get drunk and then come home a mess, just like Anson. But there's a pretty key difference in this story. In this story, Charlie, he finds a way to recompense, to reconcile. And we'll go into that in a minute. So we have that same theme of responsibility, of irresponsibility as well. He was irresponsible, he treated his family wrong, and as a result, his daughter went to stay with his stepsister and his brother, Lincoln and Marion. Now, later on in his life, Charlie decides that he really wants his daughter Honoria back. He wants her as a part of his life again. And he realizes that in order to do that, he needs to take some accountability. I just realized there's a cat behind me. Okay, he needs to take some accountability, and he does that. He quits drinking. He quits drinking except for one drink a day, which honestly, that was a huge step for him because he was a total drunkard before. So he becomes constantly sober. He has his one drink a day, but he is strict on not allowing himself to go past that. And in addition to that, he kind of cleans up his act. He gets the other things that he needs to in his life together in order to prove himself responsible enough to regain that that ownership, not ownership, yeah, that ownership of Honoria, his daughter. And so he really was able to prove that to Lincoln and eventually to Marion. Although she was very hesitant at first, she eventually warmed up and realized that he truly was repentant of the problems that he had made and the pain that he had caused his family, and that he really did have a new mindset that he was set upon. So the differences here really are that Charlie set an example of accountability, responsibility. He took responsibility for his actions. He accepted the fact that he did those things. He committed those wrongs, and then he did what he could. He did everything that he could to recompense and to reconcile. And then we have on the opposite side Anson. Anson, he was irresponsible, and although it crossed his mind, he never really took accountability for those actions. And the consequences of that failure to take accountability were that he led a pretty lonely life and a very dependent life. The narrator at the very end of the book notes that Anson really was dependent on someone liking him, on being in love with somebody. And that's proven as at the very end of the book, Anson leaves the narrator to go off and spend some time with this attractive girl that he met at the bar. So those are my observations between these two stories, and I think they both present a very powerful message, which is why I'm actually not going to argue for one or the other, because I think that they both present the same message in very opposite ways. They show the extremes in both sides of reconciliation, of repentance really, and of accountability.